what's wrong with the blacks that they need white women and white people or to feel sorry for them? And what's wrong with the blacks that around the world they're not able to do for themselves? The men are weak and they need some white woman or some white man or somebody white to come in and save them. Why do you feel sorry for the blacks?
My guest is Kim Heller, a fierce anti-apartheid activist turned political analyst and author of No White Lies, Black Politics and White Power in South Africa. Kim, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for the platform. I appreciate it.
Now, I will have to confess to you, Kim, that I really first came across your name with the recent Jesse Lee Peterson, The Fallen State podcast that you've done. I will say to you in all sincerity that I actually loved the podcast, that I really enjoyed it, that whether you like Mr. Peterson's style or his politics or not, he somehow does something that is quite magic for the viewer and the listener. Peterson is well known. He's a well-known Black American social and political commentator. I've noted here for our listeners, viewers, who mocked your, in his words, love for, and I like the way he says it, love for the black man, who Peterson claims is incompetent and unable to save himself. Quite ironic. So let's, before we start this discussion, just take a short look at a part of a discussion between yourself and the relatively famous Jesse Lee Peterson.
Well, what's wrong with the blacks that they need somebody to feel sorry for them and to help the poor blacks? And why can't they move away and do for themselves? What's wrong with them that you and other whites feel so bad for them? What's wrong with them? Why can't they make it?
My activism, as I said, is not born out of pity. It's born
No, I'm
out of a
asking you
sense of
why.
justice.
I'm asking you why are they so pitiful? Why are the blacks so pitiful?
Well, I don't know who you socialize with, but I do not see black people as pitiful.
They complain about the police. They complain that they can't make it. Somebody else holding them down. They complain about everything. And they need some white woman or some white man or somebody white to come in and save them. What's wrong with them that they need that from white people or anyone? Why can't they just get up and do for themselves? What's wrong with the blacks?
You know the answer to that if you were being perfectly honest.
What's the answer to that?
The whole system is against black people. I even see that the whole and so they don't need white people. They just need for the system to be dismantled.
Why? They just need to get up and do. Why they need a system to be dismantled for them to get up and do for themselves? That doesn't make sense. Why do you feel sorry for the blacks?
Kim Heller, that was quite something. What happened there? How did you get into this?
Well, I got a request from his producer, and I was quite busy to be honest, I was quite busy at the time. And I made an awful racist error of seeing that it was an African American.
First mistake.
I confessed to that. Then I thought, no, I didn't even really research.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, that should be fine, making really ridiculous assumptions. And I think a day or two before the broadcast, I saw that he was extremely right-wing. And I looked at the format and, I'm not sure that I would have gone onto his show. Nonetheless, I thought it was quite funny. I mean, he called Mandela a communist pig who should never have been released. And he also had some issues with the concept that a man would marry an educated woman, because in his view, the educated woman is just almost a pariah, So it was quite an alarming interview for me. And I'm quite a serious person, quite a quiet person, actually. So I didn't realize I was like in some kind of entertainment horror show.
I actually really loved it. All it was very funny. I could see that you felt profoundly uncomfortable, and that you were obviously set up, and that you did not know what to anticipate, and that this came as a shock to you as well. But it was, at the end of the day, actually quite funny. And I must confess, I also told this that I've watched a lot of his shows. I also discovered him on One Good Day and couldn't quite puzzle out what is this man all about and what are his politics about. Until this day, I actually don't know. Is it a comedy show or is it a serious show? So be it as it may, I take my hat off for you for having done this, and I can imagine that it must have felt horrible even in the better moments. In my mind, when I saw you, I kind of, and maybe I'm being unfair, and let me ask you this: are you, in South African terms, what one would call rather? Maybe it's not a nice way to say it, but are you the South African female Carl Niehaus?
That's a lovely question to start off with. It actually is a fun question because actually, people on X are quite hilarious because they don't know anything about our lives, but then they make up adventure tales and fiction. So yes, apparently I'm married to Carl Niehaus. We have a child together.
Okay.
And etc. etc. The truth is that I've known Carl for quite a few years, and I have a lot of respect for him. I think I can understand similarities between himself and myself because I was born, as you would have seen in the Jesse interview, into a very Orthodox Jewish family and a very conservative family. And I felt no resonance with that family. So to break out of the Jewish culture, which is, as you know, very
Tough.
exclusive, and it's difficult to break out of and rebel against that, it was not easy. And because I had to go through that experience, I can understand Cole, where he found being Afrikaans at that time, when being Afrikaans really meant being part of the apartheid system largely.
Yeah.
I can relate to that because I know the pain of dissociating yourself with your own community. It's a very costly thing. It's a very painful
Yeah.
thing. And I think it takes courage. You may not agree with our perspectives, but that journey's not easy. I would rather have stayed comfortably in my own culture and my own privilege. And so Cole, I mean, he's had an extraordinary journey. I think he's a brave activist.
Another figure that's mentioned when I did a little bit of research on you was Andile Masitama, I hope I say it right now, who I recently interviewed a couple of months ago.
Oh, wow.
And Masitama and Julius Malema, you both label them as the best politicians in South Africa. Explain that to me.
I got involved with the EFF and I met both of them. And I hold them both in high regard. It's so interesting. And I think my advantage and privilege is to meet people as opposed to hear from media headlines what they like. And so I met Julius Malema when I don't know if I can just go a little bit back into contextualizing that.
Yeah, I'd like to know, how did you
Okay,
meet him?
so I was always enamored by the ANC. I celebrated. I think I might be one amongst the first people to get the actual membership card, and thought that here everything would be well.
Yeah.
And even in 1994, I was a very junior researcher working with Nelson Mandela, and my experience with him was that he was just a wonderful man, as a person. And in my upcoming book, I write about a meeting that we had and how humble he was and generous and just a good human being who I believe really cared about Black people and justice. And I became very despondent with the ANC, particularly around the Marikana massacre. I couldn't understand that a Black government would side with white capital against its own people. It totally changed me. And when I saw that Dalim Mpofu, who I'd been at university with, we were active in student politics together, had joined the EFF, he said a beautiful thing. He said, I never left the ANC left me. And I remember that moment in my life. It felt like That's always what I wanted to say, but I didn't realize it. And I contacted him. I didn't know him hugely well, and I said, I feel maybe if someone like him could go to the EFF, I could do so because at last it felt like there was a party that I could feel that I could be part of. And he introduced me to Julius Malema. And actually, in my new book, I wonder if I write touch on this. I might actually. I met Julius and I went through the office. There was a lovely spirit and met a lot of the fighters. This was in 2013, before as the party was being launched. And I thought maybe I could play a communication role because that's my background as a communication expert. And I went through to Julius called me, like, come, come, come. And I went into his office and I sat down with him and I said, Julius, I have a big problem with you. I don't know that we'll ever be able to work together because ideologically we're very different. And he looked at me like I'm crazy. Like, what is this white woman doing sitting before me? And she's telling me she has ideological issues. And I said, you support Orlando Pirates. I'm like a Kaiser Chiefs fanatic, which I really am. And
Hmm.
he laughed like crazy. He had such good spirit. And I just thought he was just very, he received
Well,
that comment very well.
let me interrupt you there just for the sake of it's a lovely story and I want to hear more details. Was this at the formation of the EFF? This was post Julius Malema, ANC Youth League leader. Just give me the kind of
So
moment in our history.
So that was, I think it was in 2013. I mean, there'd been talks about the formation of the party earlier than that, but they had started to gather some people. So Dali Mpofu had just joined, Floyd was there. There were a
Mhm.
number of other politicians,
Yeah, yeah,
political figures. And I had wanted to, it was just prior to the 2014 election, which was obviously a pivotal election.
yeah,
So I thought perhaps I could go in and help on election matters, which
yeah,
I'd done actually both for the ANC before and for independent newspapers. I was one of the pollsters.
yeah.
So I thought behind the scenes I could go and assist. And
Yeah.
within that meeting, Julia said to me, "No, we welcome your effort and help us." And so actually, what I did, which very few people know, is that I took off a year from corporate. At that time, I was financially okay to do that. And I really just dedicated myself to the EFF as a volunteer
Mhm.
because I saw a lot of promise. And I worked with Julius, I worked with Godric Godi, I worked with Mbaseni a lot, and I met Andile. And I must say that, the impression of people that the EFF is an uneducated movement is so false.
Yeah.
Working with Julius at critical times where strategic decisions had to be made, I was extremely impressed by his ability to think on the spot, to
Yeah.
come up with strategic options, to deal with problems that none of us could really deal with. It was a new territory for many of us going into elections, submitting national lists, making sure that we were compliant. And he was great, and I enjoyed my experience with him. I think he's an extremely intelligent man, and I'm always surprised when people say he isn't. When it comes to Andile, um, I think as I said in that interview, one of the greatest minds of our time. I have enormous respect for him, and he taught me probably more than any other person I've met about the need for Black consciousness in South Africa. I have a great deal of respect for him.
This was at the beginning, the foundation. So you were there at the foundation of the Economic Freedom Front, setting up this new party and getting it ready for, you said, I think the 2014 elections or something like that. To be honest, you're a young, sweet, white woman with a Jewish background, and you get into contact with this guy. Is this political opportunism for Malema, or and what is it about the philosophy, the ideas of the EFF that would attract you to bring you into this unique situation?
I think, people may say, well, the first white woman in the party. There are a lot of white people now in the party. I joined at a time when it was very unpopular. I remember attending a rally and going back to get a cold drink on the way back after many hours of a very hot rally, and was in a supermarket queue and being spat on by an Afrikaans man who told me I was like a devil.
Yeah.
And so, I got a terrible reaction from white people, but I think I did very little for Julius. It wasn't that they wanted me to be part of that. And somebody along the line had said the communication of the EFF is so outstanding, Kim. We can see that you constructed it. And I said, no, not at all. Strange enough, I went in to help, but I learned more from them than I could ever have hoped for about
Yeah.
media and communication. So I didn't play a very important role. I was delegated to work in Alex, which, like most people, I didn't know very well. I had a few university friends there, so I would, go and have parties and
Yeah.
meet people. But I can tell you, I was responsible for half of Alex and the campaigning there. So every day that was my life. And that changed me a lot because I saw on a day-to-day basis, I wasn't a pedestrian in terms of being in Alex. I was part and parcel of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I saw things that I think most white people haven't seen. Through the time that we were campaigning there, there was a shack fire. We virtually witnessed a man being, burned to death. We helped his family and got his remains sorted out. He was a Zimbabwean and the ANC wouldn't help at that time. And I saw the compassion of the EFF to say, here's a human being who's passed away through horrific conditions, socioeconomic conditions. And the EFF community rallied together and helped his family.
Yeah.
So there were very painful moments. I was on the ground. I wasn't sitting in head office strategizing,
Yeah.
at a top level. And my experience, I left the EFF, but I think I was too ungovernable. I'm not really good at listening to commands, but still today, I have so much respect for the average ground force of the EFF.
Yeah.
Wonderful people who've been selflessly involved in putting the agenda of radical economic transformation forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm in the history of EFF, I'm not even a footnote, actually.
What is the policy framework of the EFF that you find convincing, that you say this is the key to emancipate South Africa from the horrors of poverty and the social and developmental phase in which we are right now? What
Well,
would that?
first and foremost, and my writings over many years has focused on this, is that I believe that land which was stolen must be returned. I believe that land is the basis of freedom, and
Yeah.
we cannot speak about being free until land is redistributed. So I believe that the ANC, in its timid, white-loving way, took land off the table, purposely so. And if
Mm.
anything attracted me to the EFF, it was that. For the colonized people, there is nothing more essential than land. I don't think the two of us can understand the impact of land being taken from you, not only in economic terms, but in spiritual
Yeah.
terms too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was the key thing I think that would attract me.
Which is also the key thing of Andelia, of course. He called me in our interview, he called me an unwanted settler. Go back home was more or less his words to me during our discussion. It was a very charming discussion, I should say. But I get what you're saying. Just a little bit back to Malema, the Malema appeal. Objectively, though, I mean, where he is today, isn't Malema, as it's been said many times, also the example of, and how do you marry these things, the Gucci socialist?
Well, I mean, I think it is a criticism, and
Oh, it's a
I
valid,
remember.
isn't it?
Sorry.
It's a valid criticism.
No, I was actually saying on a platform. Actually, it was hosted by Carl Niehaus because he does
Mm.
really great. You must really come through actually on X Spaces, and he does educational discussions every week. And we were discussing the South African situation. And I raised the issue that my belief is that all public officials should use public transport, hospitals. I really believe in that. So if I was a member of parliament tomorrow, I would follow that. I believe the EFF should be doing that. Actually, I was quite impressed that Action SA, which is not a party I support, have now are putting together a bill in Parliament that all parliamentarians must use public hospitals and facilities. That to me is a Sankarist type of approach to governance, and so one I support, and one which the EFF purports to do, but hasn't lived up to fully, actually, in my criticism. So he is not the Thomas Sankara politician in term if we look at how he materially lives his life. But the policies do resonate very well with the work of Sankara, the issue of sovereignty, self-dependence, cultural superiority and reclamation. But he could be criticized for that. I remember once I was traveling back from Parliament. I was a guest of the EFF and I was traveling with Floyd, and he had just put out his book, The Coming Revolution. And I was sitting, I'd asked him to autograph my copy, and we're sitting, and I took a picture as he was autographing. And when we arrived in Johannesburg, which is like a 2-hour flight, there was an explosion of social media and articles saying, look at Floyd's shoes, which were expensive. And I thought, oh my gosh, here I am sitting with him, the deputy president, discussing a beautiful book about the history of the struggle, the ANC Youth League, the EFF, and now people are commenting on his shoes, which perhaps is something to discuss. But in the context of here, we have a historical document written by a collective of Black revolutionaries. I thought that focus on expensive shoes was misguided. So it can be mischievous.
You may think that, Kim, and it might be convenient even to say that right now. And I'm not trying to be tough on you right now, but I kind of have the impression that you come from a place of where you really believed in these things. A lot of heart and a lot of passion in that. And let's be honest, and from that framework, that mental frame, and I know lots of people that have very, very progressive ideals and firmly believed in a lot of liberal ideals and the ideals of the new South Africa. But you've got to confess that there is something basically quite disgusting about a political leader writing these authentic good books about the condition of the country and the people and so on, whilst wearing their fancy shoes and Gucci bags and things like that. There is something quite repulsive about that, quite honestly.
I think that it's not something that I would stand up and say, look, I'm comfortable with that. But I think that must be applied across the spectrum. We can say that about Black politicians, but rarely do we say that about white politicians. So yes, it's not the governance that
the white guys. Let me interrupt you right here. The white politicians that you're referring to, and once again, I'm with your heart. They're justified in saying what they want to say because they're free market people. They believe in money. They believe in the dollar. This is what it's all about. You don't come from that world. Malema is not supposed to be from that world. Shabumbu is not supposed to be from that world. That's my point about it all. That's the vulgarity that I talk about. That's the selling out of the dreams. Your dreams, I suspect that we're talking about, if we really scrutinize it a little closely.
I think I don't support that, but I do see the other side of how Malema is doing great good, often behind the scenes for Black families that we don't see. So I think his actions do support that.
So
Whether he
do
likes fancy things, that's something that's his personal choice. Does it resonate with the politics? Perhaps not. But does his action on the ground resonate with that? Yes, I do believe so.
Who left guitar? Killer man. Who left guitar? Yamasa.
Do you also sing Kill the Boer?
Do I also
sing Kill the Boer?
I haven't been in a rally that that when I was there, that song wasn't being sung. I was in like a lot of the rallies in the beginning, and then I left the party. So, but I think you're asking me whether I approve of the song or that I'd sing it, or
No, I mean, I
I've got.
understand. I understand the discussion around the song, and I also understand, and a lot of people will be very angry if I say that. But there is a constitutional court that made a decision, and I respect that decision, and I can also understand where they come from. The point is that I'm talking about a human being, and I'm talking about, do you actually sing a song that, although it might still be within the framework of the law of South Africa, is painful to a lot of people? Do you sing that song? Will you sing that song? Have you sung that song? And what does it feel when you sing that song? I guess that's my question.
I haven't personally sung that song, but if I was in an EFF rally now, I would be
Mhm,
part of it. And
mhm,
I don't see it as a song that's harmful to any individual
mhm.
because that song, and we could speak for an hour on this, was sung even by ANC people. I think there's even a clipping of Nelson Mandela. That song
I
has got
get that.
nothing to do. Sorry?
Yeah, I get that. I understand.
That song has got nothing to do with killing the Boer or an Afrikaner. It's got to do with killing a system of oppression.
Yeah, yeah.
So I believe that song should be sung now because I think the youth need to know what that song was about. The
Mhm,
youth, the black youth, are still in a state of being oppressed, and there's no freedom. So that
yeah.
song is valid, and it's not a matter of constitutionally accepted. To me, it's part of the struggle history. In the
Mhm,
same way that I accept the song "From the River to the Sea," this to me
mhm.
is a legitimate war cry. Well, war cry perhaps is not the right word. It's a legitimate rally call.
My question really is, do you really think it's necessary? Does it contribute to? Does it really mean anything? Does it put food on the table of those poor black people, I guess, if one really wants to push it? Is it really necessary at this point to do that? Should one not say, well, I understand this is part of our history, it's part of our culture, this is part of the struggle. No, we don't mean kill the Boer, we mean kill the system. I get all of that. But if there are people that are so profoundly and deeply offended by that, should we not kind of, just as human beings, consider and say, well, you know what, I don't really need to sing that song because it doesn't really contribute much to the struggle.
Um, yeah, I know. I think it must still be sung until the system of white oppression falls.
Mhm.
That song should be sung. And I do hear the voices of people. Please apologize. I apologize for my voice. I've got very bad flu. But I do hear the voices of people and some who are similar in politics to me saying, perhaps let's just not sing it because it's causing international tension and a lot of unhappiness. But my principal position is that it should still be sung until the system of apartheid and colonialism and neoliberalism has fallen. So, and also, who is it offending? Because there's no correlation between singing that song and anyone from the EFF going out and literally killing a Boer, because it's not about that. And there's a sophistication amongst fighters. They may not all be formally schooled. I can say, if I had a Bible or on my heart, that the EFF fighters that I have met are very politically informed and know what they are rallying for. There's a high level of political literacy that I haven't seen in other organizations. So if there was that correlation, I would say let's look at it.
Yeah.
But it's not causing harm. If it's causing upset for Afrikaans people and farmers because they're offended by it, then I don't think that's good enough reason to stop. For instance, now your audience is really going to love me, but I always speak my uncomfortable truths. I'm not here to look for affirmation. Is that when, for instance, for me, destem incorporated in the national anthem offends me because I remember some times of great pain in my life when I was working with activists in Soweto and otherwise when that song was very omnipresent. And I always associate that with apartheid.
Yeah.
So I, for instance, am one of the people who will sit down when that part of the anthem is sung. Now,
Yeah.
if Afrikaners had done more to reconcile and offer reparations, and not only Afrikaners, white people, British speaking, English speaking people, might have a different attitude. But that song reminds me of apartheid. It's like the Springboks, actually. You know, I
Hmm.
cannot support the team.
Yeah.
And that's my orientation. And you've just lost all your viewership and you'll get horrible comments that never let this crazy woman on.
I believe in freedom of speech,
Mm.
Kim. I believe it's your right to say these things. I'm also saying to you, just rather cynically, and I'll say this, and this is my message to Julius Malema, and I must confess that I'm one of those journalists that would love to sit down and talk to Julius Malema. But I would say to Malema, well, if you want to carry on singing the song, well, do so, because you keep on feeding your enemy, and you give your enemy a lot of ammunition, and you've got the whole world turning against you. So I don't know if it's such a smart thing to do anymore.
I
I
don't
would
think so.
on
In
that
fact,
base. Well,
if I
and
could actually,
yeah,
if I
please
could
do.
pose a different opinion, I don't think so. I think that Julius Malema is building up his base because he doesn't really care what you would say or I would say or
Mhm.
white people, and certainly not Donald Trump. You know, we must always be careful. Like, for instance, this recent AfriForum case that they've taken him to court on this gun or this real gun or the toy gun or whatever.
Yeah.
They want him to go to prison. But my interpretation, and I've just done an analysis for one of the journalists, is that I think that's going to embolden him. It's going to build his image up as a martyr, not
Mhm.
only in South Africa, but on the continent and in the diaspora. So I think that the AfriForums that are gunning for Julius Malema are going to see him rise more. And he won't pander to that. That's part of his strength. You know, the minute he becomes apologetic and liberal, he's lost his footing.
I don't think it's wise to do it. I think he's doing himself damage, but he's a very clever politician. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You may well be right on how it will work out at the end. I do know, though, that his enemy is certainly also feeding on that as well. So how that thing will work at the end of the day, the future will tell us. But let's just get this out of the way. Do you really believe today, 30 years post-apartheid, that white South Africans still stand in the way of black liberation?
Our system is geared towards white supremacy, ensuring that white interests are maintained. In fact, in my first book, I speak about 1994 as a jackpotting of white privilege. It's an extension of an illicit tender of whiteness, and it's masterfully created. I think that the ANC people were completely outmaneuvered by the agents of white power. So the system it advantages white people at every turn. And that needs to be eradicated. It can't be reformed because it's not willing to be reformed. So we need a black child today is not equal to a white child. He's still disadvantaged by generational disadvantage, by lack of wealth, by lack of opportunity, by lack of collateral. And I think it's mischievous to present a different picture.
Did you believe at the time in 1994, did you believe in the new multiracial democracy, the new South Africa? Did you believe that we had created the foundations then for a new world for South Africa? Were you happy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said earlier in the interview that I was celebrating. I remember spending overnight at the IC Center. I was a party agent for the ANC, and the spirit was just wonderful. If you were in that center, there was a sense of something new coming through, and I thought that was wonderful. But we can't ignore the threats from the Afrikaans right wing at the time of the hoarding of food, of
Actually,
the
quite minuscule if you're really honest about it. I mean, it was just almost irrelevant. We had an upset with that whole thing around Babotswana, I remember, but I must confess that I don't see any dramatic kind of a kickback from the white people post the new constitution.
well,
Significant.
yeah, I think that white people just carried on. Well, they were fearful that there would be revenge for the atrocities done,
Yeah.
and they weren't. And that shows throughout history the colonized are far more humane than the colonizer. And they just continued. And that's my
They
most
just continued what?
They just continued their lives to enjoy their privilege. They didn't sacrifice anything. So
Uh-huh.
there was no reconciliation. There was reconciliation of Black people with their poverty and
Yeah.
white people with their privilege. And that should never have been allowed. That we have apartheid thugs and assassins now that are still being looked after by the state, to me is absolutely appalling. It's symptomatic of an undone reconciliation.
But
So,
if I may say so, in terms of specifically that, quite irrelevant though to the big picture. I mean, there's a couple of bad guys still running around 20, 30 years later. That might be the case. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's irrelevant to the total picture, to the globe, the big picture. And my question to you was, and is still is, were you happy then at the time with this magnificent transition? People around the world could not believe their eyes that this bad, evil apartheid system had relinquished the power and handed over power in totality to a new Black regime. Were you happy with that, which was created through the
I,
mechanisms, I guess, of CODESA and the creation of the new South Africa? And there he was, standing, Nelson Mandela, the new president of a new, free, democratic, multiracial, democratic South Africa.
well, I think I have an issue with your wording because, first of all, there was no relinquishing of apartheid.
Was
Um,
there a kickback?
Apartheid was the only reason apartheid ended was because it was untenable. It had become bankrupt, not only financially, but morally. And, that's why this illusion of F.W. de Klerk getting a Nobel Peace Prize, I've actually been spoken out against that as a total ridiculous award. There's no apartheid leader that's a better apartheid leader. There was no reconciliation. There was no social justice. And in the words of somebody I admire, the late Chris Hani, who obviously had to be killed by white agents, um, he spoke about if we want peace, we must work for social justice. None of us have worked for social justice. White people have continued to use their unholy white privilege. And that's a shame. So I was very excited at the time. As I said earlier in the interview, I believed in the concept of a non-racist, non-sexist society. I don't believe in that right now. I
Mhm.
believe we have to fix issues and reclaim Black um, sovereignty. And then we can meet as equal partners. When you want objective facts, it's that most of the land is still in the hands of white people, most of the economic wealth. That's where we have failed as white people to do what is just and moral.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to figure out for myself. You said early on, and that was my point of departure as well. I celebrated here in Amsterdam the freedom of the new South Africa. I celebrated whether it was wise or not, whether it was me just being naive or not. I celebrated this very liberal new constitution and the creation of this democracy in South Africa. And as far as I can remember, there was still a fairly strong white, if you want to call it, military at the time. There could have been a different outcome to all of this. I understand the boycotts against the country, the sanctions, the economic conditions, but there was a point at which whether they willingly did so or not, the fact is they relinquished their power and they handed over power to the new majority government. That's a historic fact.
I can't accept that version of history.
What are you questioning about my picture, about my version of it?
It wasn't I mean, it wasn't a handover. It wasn't like whites generously handed over power. If there was generosity of white people, we would have returned land. We would have transformed and democratized the economy, which we've owned unfairly so. So the handing over, it wasn't like the Afrikaners or the white society said, "Here, let us give you power." Actually, it was all just actually a cover up because economic power remained where it was, cultural power remained where it was. What black people got, but they weren't given. They uh, they were the majority and they voted in a government that was electoral democracy. And they got the vote, but
So
political
let
power
me
is not
try to
enough.
understand, Kim. Let me try to understand it. So there wasn't the social revolution that you or many others might have wanted. There wasn't a kind of a la Freedom Charter social revolution and a new socialist South Africa created. There was a negotiated settlement, but there was a settlement. There was a handshake. There was an agreement. There was a CODESA. There was a new government created. The African National Congress took power of government, all its institutions, the military, the police, the entire infrastructure, everything included the state-owned corporations and enterprise, etc., etc. There was a handover of that. I did not give my few cents that I had in a bank account at Standard Bank at the time to my black nanny at the time. No, I didn't do that. But there was an agreement signed and sealed, and that meant that the African National Congress became, in terms of governmental terms, the owners of the new South Africa. That did happen. The question is what went wrong, I guess.
Yeah, well, I still don't agree with it. They weren't handed anything. Actually, the whole thing to me was just a farce. But anyway, we can move upon that. I mean, there's a lot of things that have gone wrong. I think the ANC has done enormously poorly as a liberation party. I'm extremely critical of the organization. And although they had a Goliath list of social ills to cure, they have been a shocking government. They've moved from caring about the broader black population to only caring about themselves, and a shocking poor example. And unfortunately, I think their poor performance then just helps create the sense that black governments are poor. I
Mm.
think they've done immeasurable damage, and
Yeah.
they haven't uplifted people. They failed,
Yeah.
and they must
I
take
mean,
responsibility for
I
that.
agree with this part of what you're saying there fully, because if I remember correctly, I got the question here in front of me really, and I underlined it in yellow for me because that's really
Mhm.
the point. Because you said to me you were happy with the fact that there's a new democracy. I was dancing in the streets of Amsterdam. Here we go. I met Nelson Mandela on I think 10, 12, 13, 14 different occasions, and I was massively influenced by the man himself, the character, the dignity, the beauty of the moment. I was heady about all of this. What went wrong? You got the power. What went wrong? You got, according to me, and I wrote it down here for me, the National Party left a resilient economic, industrial core and high-end infrastructure into the hands of this new government.
Well, I would disagree with that because there was a lot of money taken out of the state by FW and his cronies just years before the election in anticipation, and that's been documented. I don't have those figures at hand, but they are historically available. And what went wrong was that there was no economic shift. The structure of apartheid still governs everything that we do. So that continues. There's no liberation without economic liberation, which is probably what drew me to the EFF as well, because they focus on the economic transformation, the need for that, well ab beyond the political. Political liberation does very little.
Mhm.
In fact, it hasn't even given dignity to many Black people who still live in the most atrocious situations.
It seems to me that what you're saying to me is that where it really had gone wrong is this was not a social revolution, the one that you dreamt about, that you fought for, that you believed in. It wasn't an a la Freedom Charter socialist revolution that succeeded. This was a negotiated settlement.
Well, yes, and none of the power structures changed. The economic power relations continue. And we have to view that within a colonized Africa and continent. I mean, if you have to look, most these days I'm writing much more about Africa than South Africa. And we see that the same dynamic is happening, that the colonizers might have left. Imperialism may not be there overtly, but
Mhm.
the aftershock
Yeah,
of all these systems of extraction remain. So
yeah,
we just
yeah.
continue. I mean, I often, when I do international interviews, speak about South Africa as a colony. That's how I categorize it.
Interesting fact. Since liberation, 1994, up to where we are right now, 2025, only 4 white people had been found guilty of using the K word. That there were only 22 people ever in this period taken to court for obstructing democracy in South Africa. And my question is, given what you're saying, is just to try to get a sort of context to all of this. Isn't that also just incredible that after at least a century of colonial rule and more than 40 years of the absolutism of apartheid, that the whites didn't really resist? They didn't really cause the new, they accepted the new system with a fair amount of grace, I would imagine.
Yeah. No, I don't see it like that at all because, first of all, I think to cite court cases, I mean, so many black people won't even have the resources to take such matters to court, and they'll know they'll lose anyway. So, and I don't think that is an expression of racial relations. I mean, we could use examples of how, two
But
black
doesn't it tell
women
you
were.
something, Kim? I mean, let's be fair here. Doesn't it tell you something? I remember I grew up in apartheid. I'm a little bit older than you. I can use all the terminology that was used in the time of apartheid. I know about the power relationships, etc., etc. And I've also talked in some of my podcasts of, I think, what I call the psychological trauma that had been caused by apartheid. And I fully accept that, and I understand that, and I think we need to talk about that. But I do think also that there is something positive to be said about the fact that, well, here we are 30 years later, 4 people found guilty of ever using the K word. 4 people in South Africa. That seems to me a willingness, a flexibility at least in these, as you would suggest, some staunch, hardcore, apartheid, evil people. Doesn't it mean something?
I don't think that is representative. I think that around braais, every weekend that word is said and derogatory things are said, but it's more than that. It's about what white people have not done to ensure equitable distribution. So that's the system we can point to, this good person, that good person, it doesn't matter. The system itself needs to be completely dislodged. And we need to rebuild, which is why I wrote an article saying it's time to shut down the Rainbow Nation. And until we do that and start afresh on the basis of a just South Africa and historical justice, we're going to continue with this illusion. I mean, in the same way that Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation was a farce,
Yeah.
this new
Yeah.
dawn of Cyril Ramaphosa is also, we're living in an illusion, a land of
But we
fiction.
also live within reality as well, and within who we are as human beings as well. And I ask myself today, 30 years later, if you are to ask me now, what price did you pay, Johan, for your sins of unfortunately being born in the land of apartheid? Then I will say to you that one of the first prices that I was forced to pay was actually losing my job as foreign correspondent for the SABC. It was a tough one for me to swallow. But I graciously accepted that and moved on. So I guess that if I really want to be a little bit like, well, you don't acknowledge, at least you don't want to make any acknowledgement that white people, at least it seemed to me, behaved in a civil fashion as we got to this new thing called the post-apartheid era and so on. Have you and your family given away 80% of your wealth to black organizations and black institutions or black charities as a leading the light for us?
Well, I come from a very conservative family who haven't done that, but in my own space, I've done that, yes.
Could you elaborate on that? I mean, are you signing off, let's say, 40% of your salary on a monthly basis to a black charity?
My money has been redistributed according to the principles I live by.
Okay, and we don't. I don't think it would be unfair to dig any deeper, and people can assume what they want to assume. I think you're trying. I'm trying to get to what would be reasonable and what would be fair to both ends of the spectrum. I'm trying to get to a point where giving context to all these things. So I want to make a few things that I wrote down that I want to make as statements to you. And I'd like to ask you your reaction to my statements, because I think that I'm one of those people that are really advocating to both black and white people that we should go and revisit our history and really look at our history to try to understand where we are today. I'm all for that, that we have to go and revisit South Africa's history as far as we can track it back. The question about statements and your replique, if you would be so kind. The white man's right to be in that part of the world. Here's my statement. It's very funny because the other day I actually did, and I'm not. This is not something I'm making up now. I did actually write past a kind of a billboard in this very progressive Amsterdam where I live that said boldly, "Jesus was a migrant."
I love that, actually.
I love it too. Migration, I state to you, is as ancient as our first faltering steps across the cradle of the continents. Both contemporary white and black South Africans are migrants. The Khoisan are the only original owners of the land. I don't know if we go back to the Ice period or the Stone Age. I'm not quite sure about all of that. But unlike, I think you, but certainly Andile Masitama's view, I believe the land belongs to all of us. And I believe that we are all settlers in that land. Your replique.
My review is that that is the white man's version of history. It's a convenient version. I believe the African was here well before us. Well, certainly that's a historical factor. And this land doesn't belong to people like me and you. We should be honest enough to admit that. We've come from foreign shores. We are here by the grace of black people. We should be very thankful. And it's the same thing as when we look at Palestine, occupied Palestine now. With the Zionists trying to claim that land, I make a lot of comparisons. Those people came from Europe. They have no right to that land. And I feel the same in South Africa. I think we are not entitled to the land. And when we're described as land thieves, I think we have to accept that label in many instances and make reparations for that. And, I say something because people say I'm very anti-white people. I'm not. I'm anti the white system, which has exploited and caused such pain. And I say in one of my articles that to return the land is to free all of us. And I believe that.
Yeah, I hear what you say, and I want to respect what you say as well. But I'm also I have to challenge you, because if we now take that and we pull that through a little bit, let's analyze that a little bit. Does it then mean that the American continent must be void of the English-speaking people who settled that land? Does it now mean that the English should pull out of Australia and give the land back to the Aborigines? Does it mean that Germany must pull back their borders to give just that little piece that belongs to Slovakia? I mean, what you're saying is obviously, I want to be crude and say nonsense, but I also want to be a gentleman and say
no, don't. I prefer robust arguments and fights.
Well, I mean, it's not even a robust argument; it's a silly argument. It's like you're trying to redefine the historic development of human beings as migratory beings. For as long as we've been on this earth, parts of land have been stolen, taken, won over in wars. Should we now pull out the entire US population because they're not the indigenous people of the land? Where do we go to with this argument, and what's the value of that at the end of the day? Shouldn't we accept that it is a historic fact that the Bantu people migrated into Southern Africa? And I'm sure in the Stone Age there must have been also black people, but as far as we can pull back and get to having some historic overview, it will appear to me that migration sort of happened at more or less the same time. Should the black people pull back to the Northern Africa where they come from and we hand over the land to the Khoisan? What are we saying here?
I believe that everything should be restored to what it was meant to be. And I don't think it's a ridiculous argument. I mean, there's no ways that the white person is indigenous to this land. They came through here and through conquest. They did vile damage. I don't know if you've ever read the journals of Jan van Riebeck, who says how difficult these natives are that it's so difficult for them to part from their land and their livestock. You know, he didn't come
But
here.
aren't you, Kim, just for the fun of it, because this is really the ridiculous part of the discussion. Aren't you denying history? Isn't that a fact of history? And how do we undo that history today? And what's the point of it?
Well, we do. We actually just restore things as they should have been before there was plunder,
According to
colonialism,
who?
and theft.
According to who? I
Because
mean, who
that
decides
is,
there? Who's going to decide? What international body is going to say, well, you know what we're going to have to do, according to Ms. Kim Heller, is we have to take the world map and we're going to have to redraw. You know, I'll tell you that the foundation of the African Union, they've got one principle that's untouched: is don't touch the borders of the different African countries, though we know they were not drawn by its original face. Because if you start scratching away these borderlines, you will cause chaos for the next 500 years that is not to be resolved. What I'm trying to say to you, Kim, is it sounds just absolutely ridiculous that we don't acknowledge the fact of history.
I have a different view from you, so we can argue for a long time. I'm not going to shift my perspective. I was listening to Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and he was speaking about how the colonial borders is actually responsible for a lot of the issues now and trauma that we're seeing in
Well
Congo.
known. Try Nigeria with 250 different cultural groups. Try that. Try to unscramble Africa in that sense. It's impossible. It's nonsense. It becomes nonsense. That's why nobody is talking about it. That's why it's not real. That's why it's irrelevant.
It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be that the AU is so in supported and at the feet of Western
Captivated
finance.
by the West.
No, it is. So that would be that. Yeah, that is my narrative. And I think if we had to look, I mean, if you see what's going on in the DRC now, I write a lot about that in Sudan, and these are places that are being destroyed by colonialism, by colonial borders that have separated brothers from brother. You know, it's the same thing in the genocidal entity of Israel, what they're doing. You know, we mustn't try and make these things pretty.
Yeah, no, I don't want to make it pretty, because the history of Africa, the history of the world is blood. It's chaos. We cannot undo that. You talk specifically now about the problems of Africa and the borders and how all the conflicts is based on these borders that were just drawn by the colonial powers. I accept that as well. You talk about where it becomes for me nonsense is when I say, well, let's talk about the cruelty of Africa. I did a little bit of research just for the fun of it in preparation for this discussion. Let's talk about the white man's arrival in South Africa and what disruption it had caused. What was the bloodletting that it had caused? Between 1779 and 1879, in that 100 period, that covers more or less the Groot Trek, the Great Trek, the inland movement of the white settlers. And as historians will tell you, at the same time, the downward migration of the Bantu people. In that period, there were wars, violent wars between the white settlers and the black, whether they were then the indigenous people or the migrating people. That's a debate. But smart people, clever people, historians have figured out that between 3,000 to 6,000 black men died in battles against the Boers, my people. 3,000 to 6,000 black men died in that period of time. However, during exactly the same period of time, from roughly 1779 to 1879, it was the period of the so-called Mfecane, in which historians will tell you that perhaps up to 1 million deaths were counted, but at least 500,000 deaths were counted. We talk about civilization, we talk about the settlers that come in and disrupt this beautiful piece of African land and cruelly murdering people as they go up trek inlands. Well, the historians will say to you that, yeah, it's true, there were about 3,000 to 6,000 black men that died in battles against the invading settlers. But if you want to put it into context and understand just the history of South Africa and the history of the continent, and I'm not a historian, I have to take note of the fact that during exactly the same time, close to 1 million black people were killed by another 1 million black people by different tribes. How do we undo all of this? Who's to blame for all of this? Who is right? Who is wrong? What are we talking about? What is the point of this?
Well, I have a different version of history, so perhaps we read different books.
Well, are you denying that the Mafekane had taken place historically? Are you saying I know better? The historians got it wrong. Professor Herman Gilmer and all these historians got it wrong that between 500 to 1 million people died as a result of black on black violence during that period of time?
No, but I don't think that really adds to the argument. I mean,
Doesn't it?
I'm focusing.
Doesn't it tell us about the violence of South Africa?
No.
Doesn't it tell us about what happens when settlers and different people meet and clash and things happen? Doesn't it inform something? Doesn't it bring some perspective to the situation in South Africa today? Is it not worth our while to acknowledge these things?
No, I think I think there's a lot of that is propagandist to create the sense of the African as a
What does that
savage
mean?
turning a
What
gun
does that mean,
against himself.
propagandist? What does that mean, Kim? What does that mean, propagandist?
Well,
It's a historic fact. It's a
no,
historic
not
fact
really.
as simple as that. It's history.
No, it's not.
Read
It's
it
not
up.
as simple. It's not as simple as that because your historical fact may be another man's propaganda. I don't buy into a lot of the stories that are told and the accounts. I mean, it's part of the apartheid
So in other words, what you're saying to me
infrastructure.
now, what you're really saying to me now is throw out the facts, throw out the science, throw out the historians. I just claim that, well, you know what, it's just propaganda. Shall we
I'm not
say the same
saying
thing about the Holocaust? Shall we say the same thing about the different wars in Europe? I mean, is there no truth anchored in anything? Just because your philosophy might not agree with it.
if you want to read it like that, I think that's incorrect interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these academic books aren't theoretically correct. I
Yeah.
think, you know,
It's a hell of a statement to make. I don't know
yes,
what
it is.
your position is.
It
I don't
is
know
a
what is
statement,
I mean, you must be a highly learned person with enormous ability and knowledge to be able to just simply say, well, you know, all these historians, there's a bunch of propagandists.
I'm not saying that, and there are
Well,
excellent
that's more or
writers.
less what you
I mean,
said.
no, there's some excellent writers. I mean, I have actually even a lot of books by Afrikaans academics on a lot of things, and I read.
Why don't you just simply read Herman Gilmer?
I do actually. I've got two of his books just ahead
Yeah.
of me on my bookshelf. I do.
Worthwhile to read. A good read, I can tell you that. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's move
I'll
on.
have to look.
My question is really, why don't we talk about these inconvenient historic facts to give us some? And I'll tell you why I'm asking these questions, because I happen to belong to the tribe that carries all the guilt of the sins of Africa on my shoulders. I'm the one who's being beaten and being told, you're the bad guy. So I'm saying, well, let's just see, you know, let's try to get context to it all. So here's another question I want to put to you, another position I want to put to you. You say we should read Steve Biko,
Yes, absolutely.
Decolonizing
That's a
minds
book.
and tongues.
That's a book
I think
worth reading.
I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea. I think we should read Biko. I have absolutely nothing against that. Quite justly, I would say, yes, let's read that book. My question, though, is once again to try to get context and put this to you, to try to make you also see that there's another viewpoint. There are other facts to keep in mind as well. The question I ask myself is, how many black political prisoners you think you would estimate died under suspicious circumstances in South African prisons? I remember the notorious John Foster prison in Johannesburg. I had to go to the offices of John Foster once, and this is terrifying. This is here where Biko was found hung in his cell, if I'm correct. How many black political prisoners died under suspicious circumstances in South Africa, do you think? Do you imagine?
I don't have that fact right now. I don't like, but I mean there have been several. And I'm not sure what point you're trying to make. I mean, the death of Steve Biko to me is enough. It's historically shifted the trajectory of South Africa. So you don't have to put
The death of one person is too many deaths. Here is what I'm trying to say to you, and this is what I'm trying to bring to this discussion. This is what I'm trying to say. I think it's time for us to really analyze these things and to stop just calling people racist and make all these accusations and white supremacy and all of this sort of the jargon that is used in this discussion. According to the detailed records compiled from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which I hope you trust and respect. You mentioned Desmond Tutu. I also had the pleasure of meeting Tutu on a number of occasions. The investigations which show 73 Black political prisoners. 73. That is during the period of basically 60s, 70s, 80s. 73 Black men lost their lives under dubious, suspicious circumstances. But if we really want to be fair about that and try to understand what that means, we have to say, well, can you remember that in a 3-year period under Pinochet, 3,200 prisoners died. 3,200, not 73. Go back and think about the Gulag deaths of Stalin. Between 1.5 and 1.7 million people died in a similar time frame. I asked myself this question this morning because I was involved as a journalist in the collapse of the Berlin Wall. I was actively involved in the collapse of the Soviet Union as a South African journalist here. During the reign of Erich Honecker in East Germany, for example, let's see if I can find the numbers here. They incarcerated roughly 90,000 prisoners. Now we talk about some pretty evil stuff here. So here's my point I'm trying to make. Botha was the boogeyman of South Africa and of apartheid. But I think it's fair to say that Botha was not quite a Hitler or a Stalin or a Pinochet or a Mao Zedong or a Paul or a Saddam Hussein or a Idi Amin or a Francois Duvalier. You get my point? The point is, we make apartheid into this extremely evil thing. I spoke to a young Black person not too long ago from my podcast, and he said to me, well, Johan, why I'm glad that apartheid is over is that at least we don't have the problem anymore of white soldiers coming into the township to murder our babies. So it's quite a distorted reality. That's my question, is I'm trying to give context to these ideas. I'm trying to say, how evil are my people? Are they as evil as what Kim Heller is telling us, or Kim Heller is telling the world? Or is there some compromise to be found in just the reality of who we are as human beings, how we develop? By the way, another thought that came to my mind before this discussion is, I'm sure you're aware that the Human Rights Declaration was signed in 1948. In real terms, that's like, man, that happened 2 days ago. It's very recent. It's very new. The very concept of human rights is brand new to humanity. So that's kind of where I come from, is to say, and I say these things because all I've been hearing the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing my podcasts or a little bit of journalism and things like that, is just how bad and how evil the Afrikaners are, how bad and how evil my people are. And there's something in me that say, well, this is just not, and it's not even about fairness. It's just not reasonable. And we're not going to solve problems with that. So help me out here.
Yeah, look, I can sympathize with your position. I think you're pulling out stats that are.
I'm not pulling out stats. That's an insulting thing to say, Kim, and that actually annoys me, if I may say so. I don't pull out stats. I do research. I've been a journalist for 40 years of my life, so I'm not pulling out stats. And I think what I've given you, we can check it and we can fact check it and we can do that 10 times over, but you'll come to the same conclusions as well. I'm not pulling out stats. I'm telling you about the real world out there and the reality of what happened in South Africa. And I am fully embracing your view of the evilness of apartheid. Absolutely. I don't want apartheid back. And I can also tell you that not my family and my friends and people in South Africa, at least in the circles in which I move, we don't want apartheid back. But I think that, and I go back to what the black podcaster mentioned to me. He said to me, Johan, I'll give you his name now, I'll find it for you now. He said the point of this obscene caricature of apartheid is what they call in the township in Soweto, they call it Abu Clever. Abu Clever. It's called milking the emotions, blackmailing the emotions of a vulnerable people for the sake of your own benefit. So that's the balance I'm looking. When is it reality? When do we have really got a case against the brutality of apartheid? And when is it simple Abu Clever? Milking me, milking my emotions for the sake of your pocket.
Yeah, I think your questions are legitimate, and I also sympathize with you that as you say, your people have been demonized. So in my view, instead of trying to find justification for acts of humanity across all the inhumanity. And I do think that you've pointed out statistics which tell a fraction of the story rather than the total system that apartheid put. I think people like us who are clearly standing for humanity, maybe in different ways, we should be more concerned about how do we construct something that is correct for all of us. I also hold on my shoulders the atrocities that my forefathers did. My family must have come from Western Europe. Some of them came from the Holocaust situation. I would have thought that they would be more compassionate to the state of the persecution of Black people. They were part of the system as much as your people were. I think we must find ways of moving forward that make South Africa a just and fair place. I think by
Well,
using,
I hear what you say, but don't you also say that that would mean that perhaps we should consider not singing Kill the Boer? Perhaps we should consider saying, well, you know what, let's really sit down around the table and talk. And perhaps we should also, and let's talk about systems. Let's talk about the fact that there are 12 million people in South Africa today that will not have enough food on the table tonight, while you and I are sitting here and having our little discussion.
Actually, I think.
And why don't we find ways to actually get together and to solve those problems as opposed to the vulgarity of dancing on a stage and sing Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer?
Yeah, I think that we need the material conditions of Black South Africans is appalling. I've been quite involved on the pro-Palestinian side, and yet I saw that there were more children who died of starvation in the Eastern Cape than actually in Gaza. And our
Terrible.
eyes aren't directed there. That actually, I remember when the EFF team was campaigning in Eastern Cape, they came across child-headed homes that had nothing, and they rushed out to the supermarkets and bought whatever they could and gave it to those kids. But it's not sustainable. Those things break my heart, and it does make me think that these talk shops, these are the things we must address, exactly as you say, material benefits for ordinary people. We owe them nothing less than that. So that is where the focus is. Perhaps, as we sit in privileged positions and we speak about songs and this and that, we don't speak about the fundamentals, but they are linked because we have to address the issue of white supremacy.
Let me interrupt you here. I'm being rude. Let me interrupt you here.
It's fine. I'm used to that.
I think just of the vulgarity of Julius Malema and many others with their Gucci shoes and the eyes of the old lady or the young mother who hasn't got food to give her baby tonight. And I think that should give all South African politicians a moment of pausing in their campaigns. I noted down here, I think 63% of our parliamentarians are millionaires. So
yeah.
we have a problem here. We have a problem here. And the question goes to what I asked you earlier on, what went wrong? I can tell you what went wrong, at least partially. And I would like South Africans to do something about it. And I'd like the Black liberation struggle to take note of that. What went wrong, I think, you talk about the poison. Well, the poison might be that 1.5 to 2 trillion rand that had been stolen through state capture and theft since 1994. That's enough money to wipe out poverty for decades, for that matter. I made a reference to it now. Isn't the poison the 63% of our parliamentarians that are sitting there with their Gucci bags?
I hope you give me an opportunity to respond. In my book, I write about the white man's medicine. I said it may have been intended to heal, but it's actually harmed. I don't use the word poison as far as I'm concerned, but you can, dramatize it accordingly. But I think you're completely right. I believe anything that is stolen from the public purse is treason. That's how much seriously I take it. Anti-corruption is unacceptable by whoever does it. And I think the level of corruption being done now is problematic, is extremely unforgivable. But then so is the corruption being done in the white business sector. I was actually very involved I was asked, and I moved my job to go and work at Avenge, where there was a lot over around the World Cup stadium, and trying to root out the white corruption related to the stadiums. I couldn't believe the level and the depth of corruption that was in that construction sector. But we look away from white corruption. We speak about it as financial irregularities. We look at the most ridiculous level of corruption under apartheid, which we still don't address. I mean, we still have these monsters like Craig Williamson still living large, apartheid assassins that we've never addressed. So we really are a sick society, and we need to get healthy, and we have to ask hard questions, address all of us. We all need to be honest about our accountability in such things and move ahead. To me, at the end of the day, I want that black child not to struggle or to starve. I don't think any child should be put in that position. That is shocking. But we have to understand what is causing that. And I believe, and I will believe that until my dying day, that this is the result of colonial powers, untransformed economy, a lack of remorse, and very poor governance by the ANC. I really believe the ANC should be voted out of power sooner rather than later. But I wouldn't, unlike you, I wouldn't want it to be replaced by a right-wing party. I want
to interrupt you there right immediately there, because that's kind of insulting. And I don't think you can make those assumptions about my politics. I asked you earlier on in this discussion what went wrong. And I alluded to the period before the formation of the new South Africa, the Codesa period. Let me put it to you that I think what went wrong, part of that, apart from the enormous amount of money that I just mentioned that had been stolen by the new regime, what went wrong might have just been the fact that there's a liberation struggle, a liberation organization that calls themselves the African National Congress, that was founded to fight for the people of South Africa, who during and before the Codesa talk, it seems to me, my analysis of it, were bought and who had sold out. And I think it would be healthy if we start actually pointing that finger and we take responsibility perhaps for that. So I think some self-reflection might be necessary. Let me ask you this question. Do you agree with me that figures such as Mr. Ramaphosa, our president, made a deal during Codesa with, I think, Ruth Meyer of the National Party, but way before that, with members of the white elite in South Africa, and that they just sold their ideals that they fought for 60, 70, 80 years for a bag of cash? And that's perhaps where everything had gone wrong.
I think that's very possible. I was having a similar discussion yesterday about whether it was somebody was arguing that it was the naivety of the ANC. And I said, I'm not so sure. I think this was all orchestrated. So absolutely, I think that that could have been state capture, a real state capture then. And I do think that somebody like our current president is very complicit in that. These are not revolutionaries. These are people who have let their people down. And I don't think it's all of the people in the ANC, but I can't think of one yet that remains at the moment that is serving ordinary people. But yes, I mean, the work, probably the work that I do respect, having undermined all history books earlier in the session, which is not really what I do believe. I just do believe there's a lot of propaganda. Is Saint-Peter Blanche is to me one of the academics I respect most. And I think his analysis is absolutely profound. It's almost as much as I say Steve Biko's book should be prescribed, Saint-Peter Blanche's book should be part of every syllabus. I think
just give me in one sentence why, what does he say that impresses you so much? What is the nucleus of it all?
Well, he speaks about the capture that you were speaking about a few moments ago. How the black elite was political elite was became servants really to the white agenda.
I like the word capture you used. It's your man, Julius Malema, who said it here at the Oxford University, and he said Cyril Ramaphosa has no qualifications except for his black skin. That's what Malema said. So no, I think that you're alluding to Saint-Peter Blanche's book, which I've not read, but I imagine that it goes along the lines of, yes, captured before you even started, sold your ideals. Weak. That's a shame.
I think it's very possible. I mean, we have to actually, even in my writings, I do commend the mastery of white supremacy because it works 24 hours a day and it's one,
I would, I would retitle that just to the supremacy of money and power, and I would not give it a skin color. I think we have to close down here. Just one last question. I tried to figure from you what is the political appeal of Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Front to you. I'd like to note to you, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell me what is your philosophy. But I do take note of the fact that since the 80s, 1.5 billion people were taken out of poverty because of the free market system. What is the economic philosophy that is so appealing, given the fact of the economic freedom fighters?
That's it.
What is the?
I've got to convert.
Thank you for converting me there. What is the economic philosophy that is so appealing about this political organization and represented by this magnificent Julius Malema? Will the facts show us that since the 80s, 1.5 billion people were taken out of poverty based on free market?
I am not a free market fanatic, and we could argue that how China has done a sterling job of taking its people out of deep poverty using communist principles. So the EFF is obviously more a socialist leaning, socialist Leninist movement. And I think it would be wonderful for you to interview somebody from the party. I'm no longer a party member, and I'm certainly not a worshipper of Julius Malema. We've had many disagreements on issues, but the fundamental policy framework, as articulated in the 7 cardinal pillars of the EFF, I think are the best way to proceed with South Africa. I believe in nationalization. I believe in land return. I believe in a socialist society that makes sure that people come before profit. I'm very anti-free market. I think within that there's a systemic need for exploitation. I think that's racial capitalism to me is not where I want to go. I want to go in exactly the opposite direction.
And will you ban your politicians from wearing Gucci shoes?
Actually, I think I'd make a fantastic president. I would make sure that we all wore handmade, poor, just ordinary goods. Actually, I do think you have a point there. I mean, the way that we live is the way we should, the principles we express is the way that we should live. So
Yeah.
I can't answer that question for Julius Malema.
Yeah.
I would take a stronger stance. I can say that I believe that our politicians, first and foremost, should be using the same public facilities that it expects its populace to use. And I think everything would change then, because they would never put up with the poor service quality that is affecting most South Africans.
Yeah. Going to be my last question to you, Kim, and thanks so much for all the time you've given me. You've really indulged me. Do you respect, or will at least consider, my view that it might be necessary for us to start demonizing the white man of South Africa and to bring context to all these questions about who we are and where we come from, and not to base it on the caricatures that it is being based on at the moment, in my terms, as an instrument of blackmail. Do you believe that there's value in what I'm trying to communicate, that it's time for us to stop demonizing, and it's time for us to start getting together against the background of 40% plus unemployment, 60% youth unemployment? I've got it in front of me here. 40%, 25 million people in South Africa dependent on social grants. 12 million people, as I said, going hungry every day. Do you think there's value in us actually stop name calling?
I hope, yes. I hope I can get this in. I see my screen's getting darker and darker. I hope that's not a political statement. But no, actually, I've enjoyed the interview and thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm not so well and I delayed it. But I appreciate what you're saying. I think it would be lovely to have a panel, perhaps, that we embrace these questions more, because what does resonate with me is your sense about caricaturing. You know, it's easy to do that. In the same way I might do that to you. You're probably seeing me as this liberal, Jewish, crazy, and whatever. We do it, and I think there's lessons to be learned. I wouldn't have a problem with being part of an exercise that takes away the demonization. I think there is merit in that, as long as we're honest about it. But yeah, I think you make a lot of sense. It's a worthwhile project to do that.
Yeah.
As I said, as long as it's done with a sense of asking hard questions, being uncomfortable, where as much as we don't want to demonize people, we can also. I would love an Afrikaans person. In fact, I would weep happy tears if somebody could look and say, I've done wrong. I've done wrong. What can I do? I'm offering myself here to be a good advocate, the same as my people. I mean, at the moment, I'm ashamed to be part of the Jewish community. Look what is happening in Palestine. It's just absolutely inhumane. So let's do that, but with a level of self-introspection.
Yeah, yeah. I promise you this is the last question, just because I want to ask it. Whatever happened to Ubuntu?
Yeah, that's possibly a subject for a whole episode. And I mean, consider looking at a panel on that. I think it would be very interesting. I think we need more community and perhaps less division, but I'm still adamant on my point that we can't have a moment of springbok togetherness where it means nothing, that in material terms people still go back to, in the instance of white people, comfortable homes, and in the instance of black people, shacks. And we need to change that. I really hope that we do. Otherwise we thrust the mission of transformation, undone transformation, on our children and their children, and that's a huge burden that they shouldn't have.
Yeah. I run the risk of sounding a little bit like Bill Clinton now. I hear your heart, and I fully agree with you as well that no, it is no point in just having the happiness of another big rugby victory, and tomorrow we all go back to our sad, miserable existence. I agree with you. That's a point of agreement. We're going to leave it here. Kim Heller, thank you so much for this talk. I hope you're going to come back.
Absolutely. I'll come and discuss my new book when it's published. That's going to cause a lot of storms.
Fantastic.